Hello again, classy people, this is Josh the Top Hat Gamer, and this week I'm reviewing Bloodborne. It's been roughly 18 months since Sony's next generation console was released, and despite some decent exclusives, there hasn't been a real system seller to speak of. Could Bloodborne be the killer app the PlayStation 4 has been craving? Let's find out. Bloodborne is set in the city of Yharnam, a decrepit gothic city plagued with an endemic illness that alters its inhabitants into bloodthirsty beasts. Yharnam's also home to a potent medical practice known as blood ministration that many travelers seek to cure their afflictions. Your character is one such traveler, and after receiving a transfusion of dubious blood, you descend deeper into the madness of Yharnam as a hunter of beasts. Your quest to find Yharnam's miracle cure will lead you to the dark corners of not only the world, but your own nightmares. As a spiritual successor to From Software's Souls games, Bloodborne follows a lot of the same narrative quirks. It features more narrative progress and cutscenes than the Souls games, but it's still very vague on details. Part of the fun of the game is working out the insanity on show by talking to every NPC and reading the lore sprinkled in with every item description. Helping Bloodborne's lore in turn stand out from the crowd are heavy influences from Lovecraftian horror, which the game uses to great effect. The world of Bloodborne is so well realised with its excellent graphical quality and memorable Victorian Gothic style. The cobblestone streets of Yharnam ooze character, and the gloomy greys and browns contribute to a somber tone overall. Bloodborne proves that a grey and brown colour scheme doesn't have to be boring, as the limited colour palette contributes to the oppressive, unsettling tone. Don't think that the environments are limited to Victorian townscapes either. Spooky forests and iced-over castles are just some of the locations that await you. Standing out from the rest of the game's gloomy visuals are the blood, shock, and fire effects. The satisfying streams of blood that fly from your enemies is a surprisingly neat looking effect, and the various elemental buffs you can apply to weapons look excellent as well. The only way Bloodborne could look any better is if it were running at 60 frames per second instead of its 30. The game's audio design is atmospheric to say the least, and at times you'll barely be able to hear the ambient music at all. It enforces a very lonely feeling, but when you're fighting the terrifyingly well-designed eldritch horrors, the soundtrack swells and surges to amp up the intensity of the situation. Add to that some of the most blood-curdling screams you'll hear in any game, and you've got an atmosphere of dread and paranoia, where there could be an unspeakable horror behind every corner. If you're new to From Software's Souls games, then you have a lot to learn. Bloodborne follows its spiritual predecessors with its risk versus reward gameplay and its challenging approach to combat. As you defeat more and more enemies, you collect blood echoes that act as your XP and general currency. When you die, you drop them where you fell, and you'll need to track back to where you died to collect them. Dying on your way to collect them loses the echoes for good, and that can be frustrating to lose so much progress, but that's on you. Cashing in your echoes means respawning all previously defeated enemies, and by trekking forward, you risk losing everything. Veterans of the Souls series will also have to learn a lot in regards to playing Bloodborne. Even though the game has a very similar tone to its predecessors, gameplay-wise it's a faster, more aggressive experience overall. The biggest departure from the Souls series is Bloodborne's lack of shields. There is one available, but it's not very good, and it's clear that From Software wants you on the offensive as often as possible. Almost all of the weapons you use are exceptionally quick, and dodge rolls have been replaced with a sidestep that is not only much faster, but is no longer affected by load limit. Clearly the developers want you to remain fast at all times. Lending credence to the idea that you're supposed to play faster and more aggressive is the health regen mechanic. After being hit, you'll lose health, but for a short amount of time you have the ability to regain a decent chunk by striking back at your opponents. It all plays nicely into Bloodborne's risk versus reward style. Players might notice that there are far less weapons available to hunters than in other Souls games, but complaints focusing on this don't hold much water. There's maybe only one double-up weapon in the entire thing, and the weapons that are available not only have their own unique movesets, the majority of them feature secondary forms with entirely different movesets. The fact that there's less weapons available just means you get to familiarize yourself with your arsenal. In another departure from the Souls style, Bloodborne gives you access to guns. While they cause some damage, their primary use is to stagger and parry attacks, giving you a devastating visceral attack. Bullets are finite, however, and much like your healing consumable, needs to be bought from vendors or picked up from fallen enemies. While they drop fairly regularly, it can be a pain as you throw yourself against a tough boss over and over, and find yourself running low on resources. Grinding early areas can work out, but it has the potential to be frustrating. Of course, the amount of grinding you have to deal with is directly related to the regularity with which you find yourself dead. Finding yourself dying a lot is made somehow more frustrating by the surprisingly long loading times. It's not a deal breaker, but for a game where you're almost expected to die with regularity, it can become aggravating. Bloodborne's multiplayer mirrors the kind that you would find in the Souls series, but with some features implemented to make playing with your friends an achievable goal. As far as the quality of the multiplayer experience goes, there wasn't any noticeable network issues that I experienced, but as per usual, your situation may vary. I think the most interesting part of the multiplayer setup is that it costs insight, a consumable that can be used to buy certain items, but also affects the world of Bloodborne at large the more you acquire. I won't spoil anything, but never assume that you see the whole picture in Bloodborne. I'd be remiss to neglect mentioning Bloodborne's mind-blowing level design and rewarding sense of exploration. At first glance, the zones in Bloodborne seem pretty small, but they're more than that. They're multi-layered, and you'll never know when a twisting alleyway or hidden ladder will lead you back to a familiar landmark. It offsets the lack of checkpoints, and the sense of progression you get when you cut the length of a boss run in half is rewarding to say the least. And then when you finally beat one of the immense, nightmare-inducing bosses, you'll be on top of the world. The bosses fit in nicely with the rest of Bloodborne's unsettling atmosphere, and you'll find yourself battling against various hulking, unnatural monstrosities as you continue throughout the game. There are also some mini-boss style fights against NPC hunters, and while they have the potential to be some of the more enjoyably fast fights, they end up feeling one-sided, as the amount of ammo they use and the damage they take is disproportionate to your own character. Lastly, finding your way in the twisted world of Bloodborne is often unclear, and finding the critical path can sometimes take forever. This isn't helped by the surprising amount of optional content, but don't take this as too much of a negative, however. Like I mentioned earlier, you're encouraged to explore, and like many other aspects of this game, finding your way through the eldritch maze that is Bloodborne is a rewarding experience. And then once you find your way, you'll die. Again. Like, repeatedly. Bloodborne may not be quite as difficult as its spiritual predecessors, but it still presents a tough challenge, all while sporting a more aggressive gameplay style and what I consider to be a more memorable and interesting visual style. It's absolutely dripping in eldritch morbidity and gothic architecture, and the sense of exploration and reward tied to its top-notch level design isn't present in many other games, if any. Its narrative is an unsettling joy to discover, and while it's not without some technical issues in the way of long loading screens and a non-optimal 30 frames per second frame rate, Bloodborne is the next-gen game to beat in my eyes. Bloodborne gets the Top Hat Gamer rating of excellent. Its unsettling visuals and atmospheric audio design coupled with a challenging, fast-paced gameplay style puts Bloodborne high up on my list of favourite games of all time. Fans of the Souls games will find a lot of familiar aspects here, but Bloodborne is definitely more than just another Souls game. In all honesty, it's not a game for everyone, but if you're looking for a game that won't hold your hand, but feels super rewarding to progress through, then Bloodborne might be for you. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the review informative and stuff. If you missed last week's review on Ori and the Blind Forest, click the annotation. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a thirst for blood that needs quenching.